Statistics South Africa data shows that manufacturing production increased by 0.7% year-on-year in June, way below market expectations. It was at 2.3% year-on-year in May. Now, economists had expected a 2.2% growth in June. The largest positive contributions were from food and beverages and the petroleum categories, while the largest negative contributions were in motor vehicles, parts and accessories, as well as wood products. The manufacturing sector is being negatively impacted on by the volatile rand and global trade tensions. It's also battling low demand as well as high input costs on the back of higher fuel and electricity prices. Corruption Watch says that about 44% of the corruption cases reported to them indicate irregularities in procurement in state-owned enterprises. Corruption Watch has released its 2018 Analysis of Corruption Trends report for the half year, ending 30 June this year. The report also revealed that corruption in municipalities around the country accounts for 9.2% of cases reported to them. Whistleblowers have informed Corruption Watch that contracts at Eskom are awarded to bidders who fail to comply with tax laws, and that officials continue to flout processes by awarding lucrative contracts to friends and family. The report says that these officials are not held to account for their transgressions, and that about 20% of bribery cases involve state-owned enterprise officials and small and medium enterprises. Procurement irregularities cases in municipalities have grown by 17.5% to over 45%. Corruption in licensing centres across the country currently stands at 3.3%. And at about 83% of corruption cases suggest that it remains difficult to obtain a legitimate driver's licence without paying a bribe. Melusi Ncala, a researcher at Corruption Watch, joins me in studio for more on this report. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News, Melusi. There's been a decrease in the number of activities reported to Corruption Watch this year compared to last year. What can we attribute that to?
Yes, there has been a marginal decrease in the report of corruption that we have received. But with that being said, we often think that it's tied in with how there's often a focus on grand corruption and not so much on petty corruption in terms of how it's reported socially in the media and so forth. So, when we look at these reports, we look at them thinking to ourselves that though it's marginal, it still remains a great concern to us to see that almost 2,500 South Africans are viewing corruption as a major issue.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you focused on the smaller, if we can call them elements of corruption. People who are reporting to Corruption Watch are complaining about schools and municipalities. Take us through that a little bit more.
So for the past 5 years or so, we've had a campaign looking at corruption in schools. It initially, our focus was on feeding schemes, because we had reporters notifying us of officials who would be responsible for stealing food that is meant to feed our children in schools. Over time, of course, we've looked at governance issues, and with the first report of ACT last year, we hinted at sextortion. Now, sextortion is the type of crime or corruption that we say is based on officials, school officials, teachers and principals who solicit sexual favors from learners in exchange for marks and promotion. So this time around, we see that there has been an increase in these reports. Last year it was about 6.3%, this time it's above 3%.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of data that is coming out of that report that has been released by Corruption Watch. So I guess my question would be, once we internalize what's happening, what these South Africans who are reporting to you and people obviously from wherever else are reporting to you, what should be done with the report?
Well, we as Corruption Watch, we are constantly engaging with the South African Police Service because it's a very important area for us. We view the corruption that's been happening there, abuse of power, which is actually a high number, as well as the bribery of police by criminals as a very serious matter. So we've been engaging with them on the anti-corruption task team. And then, so there's a continuous campaign that we're doing there, but we're also launching a campaign looking at health issues, seeing that there has been serious issues plaguing our health sector. So we have officials within the health sector who will steal medical equipment or medication, and we found that they actually, according to our reporters, sell these off in some instances to drug dealers who make drugs like nyaupe. So these are the areas that we are currently looking at.
I'm glad that you said in your report that corruption is both a private sector and a government issue. If you can just expand on that a little bit more for us, because I think sometimes we think it's either or. And then can you give us a tangible example of how corruption affects us on a day-to-day basis, because sometimes it's quite difficult when we're seeing these numbers and these percentages.
So the corruption issue, I think it's one of those ongoing debates in South Africa in terms of government and private sector. So we view corruption, the way we discuss it is that there's always the person or the entity involved. And if anything, if you look at our reports, well over 50% of them, it's just that the stat may not be in this current report, will show that there's always a person or an entity that is seeking to corrupt an official of the public sector. So that's how we look at it, and the focus on the public sector, that's because these are individuals that are supposed to safeguard, they're supposed to take care of our resources and supposed to take care of the nation. As for how corruption affects us on a daily basis, you just have to look at the corruption incidents within licensing centers, where we have well over 80% of bribery cases. So in this particular instance, you find that a person will say to us that they have to pay anything between 2,500 and 3,500 just to get a license. This excludes money that a person has to pay to a driving instructor, for example. So, you know, these are often vulnerable people, young people who are looking for jobs, so it impedes on that process.
Melusi Ncala giving us an insight into that report that Corruption Watch has released. He is a researcher there. Thanks so much for your time. Now